Well, welcome to the introduction for Chapter 15, going over the general information about the heart mainly. So some fun facts. These are always good to know at parties. If ever there's a conversation that's kind of dull, you just throw out, hey, did you know that the heart pumps about 7,000 liters of blood each day? That's a good way to get people's attention away from you. So anyway, it's good to know. About 7,000 liters of fluid pass through your heart. Now, we've got a lot less than that in our body because it's counted over and over again. The average person is going to have about 2.5 billion heartbeats, contractions per lifetime. And the way that this works is we've got the heart, and everybody knows it looks, something like that, right? So the heart is going to pump out blood to our body and to actually pump out blood to a capillary bed. We'll talk about that because there can be different ones. And then from the capillary bed, it comes back to the heart. So the pattern is I pump out to arteries. Arteries will keep branching and get smaller until we have to what's called arterioles. From there, we're going to have these capillary beds where the gas exchange happens, and then the blood will go out of the capillary. Now it's on its return trip to the heart, and the venules are first. They're small. They start merging together to form larger veins, and then the veins go back to the heart. Now, here is something that everybody's going to have to watch and you don't get caught up in. You might have learned that arteries carry oxygenated blood and veins carry deoxygenated blood. And that, while it might be true in most instances, it's not true in all. So it is a false statement. If you wanted to make it true, the statement would be arteries always carry blood away from the heart, and veins always carry blood to the heart. And we're going to look at a special little system, a circuit that is opposite of what you've been taught. Now, the heart and all the blood vessels make up what is called the cardiovascular system. And so in the cardiovascular system, there are circuits. There are two main circuits. So again, we're going to pump blood from the heart into an artery. It's going to go into some sort of capillary bed. I'm just drawing it like this. That doesn't look anything like it, where gas exchange is going to happen. And then I'm going to have a vein that carries it back to the heart. That's the way it always works. So I've got a pulmonary circuit, which is the new one. Pulmonary, hopefully everyone knows, means lungs or respiration. And so in this circuit, I'm going to be pumping out deoxygenated blood to the lungs. And there it's going to pick up the good, yummy O2 and drop off the carbon dioxide. And then the blood's going to come back to the heart. Now, in the pulmonary circuit, arteries carry deoxygenated blood. Man, how can that O look so good on the other one and this one not? It carries deoxygenated blood. So in the pulmonary circuit, the vessels will be blue on the model. And it is amazing how easy it is to, once you see blue, automatically think vein. So I'm just kind of giving you a little warning there. So the pulmonary circuit is going from the heart to the lungs and back to the heart. Now, the systemic circuit, which is the majority of our circulatory system, and the reason that most people learn arteries carry oxygenated blood and veins carry deoxygenated blood, which is false. The systemic circuit is talking about how the heart carries blood out to our body. It carries blood out to our body, drops off the oxygen, picks up the carbon dioxide, and then comes back to the heart. So in this one, the arteries carry oxygenated blood. And so this is, because it's the majority of what the cardiovascular system is, and it is the one bringing the oxygen out to the body, this is the one that is studied in entry-level biology classes and stuff. And so unfortunately people get it ingrained in their mind. They're backwards on the artery and vein thing. So in the systemic circuit, yes, arteries carry oxygen and blood, but it is because it's going away from the heart to the body cells and then back to the heart. So these are the two circuits. So I've got, if I drew it like this, I'd have one going to my lungs. That, that looks more like another heart. It was supposed to have the lobes of the lung. I was trying to be, anyway, go into the lungs and then back to the heart. And then I'm going to have the systemic circuit, which goes from the heart out to the body, dropping off the oxygen and then bringing the old back. So it's this little circle 8. This other picture probably does a better job, this next one. So it is this crazy spaghetti junction. If you've ever been in big cities, usually they'll have an area called Spaghetti Junction where there's a bunch of overpasses and stuff, but that's kind of what this is. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on at the heart. And so I've got blood that is coming into the heart. It's going to go into the first chamber called an atrium, which we'll look at in the next video. From there, it goes into the pump, which is called the ventricle, and then gets pushed out. And then it starts its little journey. It goes on this one, it's going to the lungs, getting oxygenated, coming back on both sides. And then once it's oxygenated, it comes back to the heart and the atrium, goes down to the pump, pumped out into what we call the aorta. The aorta takes the blood out to the body, drops off that yummy oxygen to all those cells. Now it's coming back with that carbon dioxide to get rid of it. All right. So those are the two circuits. So the heart in general is a hollow cone-shaped muscular pump. It's found in the mediastinum of the thoracic cavity and then just above or superior to the diaphragm. It's going to have 4 chambers. I'm going to have 2 upper chambers called atria and 2 lower chambers called ventricles. So the blood comes into the atrium, all right and left atrium, and then it's going to go from the atrium to these 2 really muscular pumps called ventricles, and the pump is going to pump the blood out. So that's the way it works. Now the ventricles are the machine. They're the pump. That's where all the real energy is going into. So the heart size varies with body size, but in general, it is roughly the size of your fist. It isn't perfectly centered. It's a little closer to the left. It is, as it says, medial to the lungs, posterior to the sternum, and anterior to the vertebral column, which I hope everybody here that just says duh, because that's pointing to in the middle of your thoracic cavity. It's going to be between the 5th or the 2nd and 5th intercostal space, and it's going to sit kind of at an angle. This kind of shows it. It's going to be here, and it's kind of pointing down. The majority of the lung is over to the left side of the body normally. Now, one of the things that's kind of weird that throws it off is this top part, this rounded, blunt, very blunt part where all the major vessels come and go here. This is called the base. Now, most people would think of the base as the bottom, but that's the base. And the pointed part down at the bottom is called the apex, just to throw it off a little bit more. So these are actually opposite of what most people, if they've ever heard these, would know them as. But the top part of the heart is the base. The bottom part is called the apex. Now, here's a couple of things that kind of throw people off, and I hope they don't. They're pretty easy, are pretty straightforward. Just don't overthink it. When we talk about the heart, there are coverings. Now, we have already looked at 2 of them. In 210, you learned about visceral and parietal membranes, these serous membranes. And so we said that visceral is on the organ, parietal lines the cavity. The word visceral means organ, and parietal means cavity. And so since we're talking about the ones that are about the heart, they're called pericardium. All right, so the layer that is on, it's attached to the surface of the heart. It's actually on the organ, or said another way, on the viscera, is called the visceral pericardium. Then if I go out one little layer, I have what's called the parietal pericardium. This is what makes that little outer encasement of a cavity. So the visceral and parietal pericardium. Now there's a space between these two called the parietal cavity. I'll circle it right here. All right, that's where serous fluid is located between these two. But there's a third one that we didn't look at in 210, and it is called the fibrous pericardium. This is a very, very tough outer membrane. Even in, so we're not going to be able to do the dissection this semester, unfortunately, but even in dissection, a very sharp scalpel has a tendency to have a hard time getting through this fibrous pericardium. It's what basically anchors the heart where it is. Now, hopefully those three make sense. The only big difference is this fibrous pericardium is the new one that I'm throwing at you, and it's the outermost one. But what I'm going to really throw a curveball for you or to you about is going to be this visceral pericardium. See, in this way of looking at things, if I'm looking at the membranes, the inner layers, the visceral pericardium, the middle layer is the parietal pericardium. They work together to make the serous membrane. And then the outermost is the fibrous pericardium. Now, when we look at the actual heart wall, so we're not looking at the membranes, we're looking at the muscle, the heart wall, this visceral pericardium has a different name. So if I go to this, and I'm going to start here at the bottom and work my way out. The bottom one on this list, endocardium. This is the little lining of epithelial tissue on the inside of the heart. So it's lining the chambers of the heart, right? It's the skin on the inside of it. And then I have this really thick layer of muscle, and it is called myocardium. It is the thickest layer by far. It's the muscle of it. Myo means muscle, cardium means heart. Myocardium is the layer of the skeletal muscle, or the cardiac muscle. This is the one that throws people off. If I'm looking at the layers of the heart, there is the outermost layer, and it is called the epicardium. And again, epi means outer or covering. Epidermis is above the dermis. The epicardium is the outermost layer. Now, it is called the epicardium if I'm naming the layers of the wall of the heart. But if I'm looking at the membranes, this epicardium is also called the visceral pericardium then. So it's the same structure, this guy right there. It's the same structure, but if I'm looking at membranes, I have fibrous pericardium on the outside. I have parietal pericardium in the next layer down. I've got this pericardial cavity, and then I have the visceral pericardium if I'm looking at the membranes. But if I'm looking at the layers of the wall of the heart, I have endocardium, myocardium, and this same structure is then called epicardium. All right, so it's the same structure, two different ways of naming it. Looking at the walls of the heart, it's epicardium. Looking at the membranes of the heart, it is visceral pericardium. So this goes over the walls here. This tells you, or the walls of the heart and what they basically do. This tells you that the epicardium is also called the visceral pericardium. Not a big deal in here. What the composition and the basic function. You'll know that the muscle is there to contract and the blood, contract and pump the blood. So the biggest part here is really understanding that these two are the same. Everything else is hopefully explanatory. Myocardium's muscle, endocardium, endo meaning inside. I hope that makes sense.